Hare Krishna. This is a reading from Raghunātha Goswami's Sri Manaḥ-śikṣā. In other words, the splendid instructions of the mind. This is a commentary on verse 3 of that particular book by Bhaktivijnana Goswami. I have never read anything that is quite as ecstatic and systematic as Bhaktivijnana Swami's commentary on this particular verse. He explains exactly how one can reach the level of bhava or rati for Krishna, and it's very important. And also, by investing one in the mercy of Lord Chaitanya, one can then explain this science to others. So here's verse 3. Yadichir avasam vajrabhava saragam prajit janur yuva dandvam tachet paricharitam arad abhilase swarupam sirupam saganam iha tasyagrajam api sputam premna nityam smaranama tadatvam shinu namaha mana. Listen, O mind, if you desire in every birth to reside in the land of Vraja with loving attachment and to serve the youthful couple of Shri Radha Krishna in close proximity, then clearly remember and offer obeisances to Sri Sarup, to Sri Rupa and his associates in Vrindavan, and to Sri Rupa's elder brother, Sri Sanatan. Commentary by Bhaktivijnana Goswami. The Manaḥ-śikṣā is a methodology by which a person can overcome their internal obstacles and gradually develop love for Krishna. This is our goal, and Raghunātha Goswami has written these verses for us. These prayers are addressed to his mind, but actually they are more relevant to our minds than to his. If we follow these recommendations step by step and try to apply them in our lives, success is guaranteed. We may think that there are more important things to think about, like our marriages. At the end of the day, however, the most important thing will be to the extent to which we have managed to develop attachment for Krishna. At the end of our lives, everything else will be unimportant and devoid of meaning, and what will stay with us is our attachment to Krishna. We will see how everything else slips through our fingers. Our health, happiness, wealth, loved ones, relatives, and friends, they will all be gone. But this wealth of attachment to Krishna will remain with us. No matter what position we are in now, it is important to know how to develop this attachment to Krishna. Otherwise, when faced with the last test, we may prove bankrupt when we no longer have anything material, and neither do we have any spiritual wealth. Raghunātha Goswami specifically says here that if you have two desires, to live with love in Vraja life after life, and directly serve the eternally young couple, then you should, quote, Sarupam Sri Rupam Sahaganan ihan tasyagrajam api sputam premna nityam smaranam tadatvam shinun manaha. Then, tada, you should remember, smara. Sputam premna nityam. Nityam means incessantly, all the time. Premna means with love. Sputam means very clearly. He says that if you have these two desires, you have to constantly, with love and very clearly, remember Sarupam Sirupam Sahaganam Iha Tasyagrajam Api. We need to remember Sarup Damodar Goswami and Srila Rupa Goswami, Sahaganam Iha Ganam, and all their associates, all their followers. Tasyagrajam, the elder brother of Sri Rupa Goswami, Sanatan Goswami. It is them that we should always think of whom we should always think of with love. Several important questions arise when we try to answer, which we'll try to answer. First, why does Raghunātha Das Goswami say pratijano for many, many lifetimes? The first thing we have been promised is that this will be our last life, and now it turns out that we have to live for many, many lifetimes in Braja. But the word of this verse means, quote, if you want to, end quote. Raghunātha Das Goswami says that the goal is bhakti, which does not require liberation from birth. Real devotees do not think that they deserve to be born anywhere in particular. Such devotees say that they are ready to be born here again and again, that they have no merits to be in the spiritual world. If we have raga, attachment to the Lord, then life in Vrindavan, even here on earth, is amazingly beautiful. His Holiness Bhaktitirtha Maharaj, despite his severe pain, shows us a great example of the beautiful picture of life in Vrindavan. One of his last pastimes is perhaps the most amazing one. Just before his departure from his body, he was in terrible pain. The pain was so agonizing that no drugs could suppress it. Sometimes he would be placed in a bathtub to relax, but the pain would be burning his entire body from within. During one such attack, Raghunātha Maharaj was next to him. As Bhaktitirtha Maharaj was writhing in pain, tears streaming from his eyes, Raghunātha Maharaj began telling him about Vrindavan, where everyone loves Krishna and where Krishna loves everyone, and where there was nothing but love. This went on for a long time, with Raghunātha Maharaj whispering in his ear and Bhaktitirtha Maharaj listening. Suddenly he smiled and he said, quote, I have never felt so good in my life, end quote. Raghunātha Das Goswami is drawing this picture because he is ready to take birth and die, to be sick and to suffer here on earth as long as it is in Vrindavan. In this way he glorifies Vrindavan and prema itself, which makes a person willing to be willing to take birth again and again, because the happiness of prema is so intense, it overshadows any material pain. This picture of life in earthly Vrindavan is presented by Srinivasacharya in a song glorifying the 6 Goswamis, Sat Gosvaminaskam, verse 8. Hey Radhe Vrajadevi Ke Chaladite, Hey Nanda Suno Kata, Shri Govardhan Kalpadupapada Tale Kalindi Vane Kuta Gosantav Iti Sarvato Vrajapare Kandar Mahavir Valo Vande Rupa Sanatana Raghuyego Shri Jiva Gopalako. Let us imagine this scene for a moment. The Goswamis of Vrindavan are clad in nothing but loincloths and shawls, consisting of nothing but patches, living there in the land of Vraja, crying, Hey Radhe Vraja Devi Ke Chaladite, Hey Nanda Suno Kuta. Where are you? Where are you, Radharani? Where are you, Lalita? Where are you, the son of King of Vraja? Where are you all? Have you gone to Govardhan or the banks of the Kalindi? They are running there, filling Vrindavan with their cries. Are we willing to live like that in Vrindavan, life after life? Raghunātha Das Goswami says, Priti Janu, that he is ready to take birth again and again because he has experienced happiness in Vrindavan. We can also experience this happiness. Such is the answer to the first question. The second and most important question is answered by Bhaktivijnana Thakur's explanation of this verse. Why does Raghunātha Das Goswami mention Sarupam Shirupam Sahaganan Iha Tasagrajamapi with all their associates? The Sanskrit means Sarup Damodar Goswami, Sri Rupa Goswami, Sanatana Goswami, Tasyagrajam, and all their associates as being the persons who we should remember clearly with love. Why doesn't he say instead, quote, remember Nityananda? Rupa and Sanatan discovered Vrindavan, but that was by the mercy of Nityananda. Raghunātha Das Goswami received the mercy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu by first receiving the mercy of Nityananda. By the mercy of Nityananda, he received Mahaprabhu's mercy. By the mercy of Mahaprabhu, he received the mercy of Radha and Krishna. But he does not say Nityananda. And he describes that we should always clearly remember Sri Swarupam Sri Rupam Sahagana Iha Tasyagrajamapi. It is this difficult question that I will try to answer. We know this famous verse, Srila Rupa Goswami's Pranam mantra, Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Shrayam Rupa Ganamayam Dadati Swapadandikam. We know that it was Rupa Goswami who was our Sampradaya Acharya, or the Acharya founder of the entire Gaudiya Sampradaya. The Chaitanya Charitamrita begins with Panchatatvamikam Krishnam Bhakta Rupa Sarupakam Bhaktavataram Bhakakyam Namami Bhakti Shaktikam. This verse, written by Sarup Damodar Goswami, describes Lord Chaitanya, Nityananda, Advaitacharya, Gadadhar Pandit, and Srivasacharya. However, none of them are mentioned in Raghunātha Das Goswami's third verse. On the other hand, these are the 5 tattvas who came to give us love of God. Yet, Raghunātha Das Goswami does not tell his mind to remember them. We know that in Chaitanya Charitamrita, again, in the words of Sarup Damodar, who states the nature of this most merciful avatar, Madhya Lila 1953. Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Padayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namni Gotishe Namaha. Sri Krishna Chaitanya, who came to give prema to everyone, had 2 missions: to give prema to everyone and enjoy prema himself. The Pancha Tattva helped him primarily with the first mission. The Pancha Tattva gave him the opportunity to spread this prema. We know Lord Nityananda, Dvaitacharya, Gadadhar Pandit, and Srivas Thakur all preached the holy name, but here Raghunātha Das Goswami teaches us the inner bhajan, the inner culture of bhajan, the culture of emotions, or raga, that was taught by Shrupam Sri Rupam Tasya Grajam. The most important thing they did was to explain spiritual experience, allowing us to join the spiritual experience of the great devotees of the past. We want to obtain the same feelings and the same emotions that they did. After all, we want the same love to be burning in our hearts in such a way that nothing else will be burning there. At the present, what is burning there is a soup of Kama, Krodha, Lobha, Mada, Moha, and Matsarya. Rupa Goswami, above all, gave a roadmap or guidebook to these feelings, explaining how spiritual emotions can be attained, how one emotion leads to another, and what causes the emotions in the first place. This is what Nityananda Prabhu did not do, not because he had a mission of his own. For instance, in Lochandas Thakur's song Akrodha Paramananda, he sings that Nityananda Prabhu goes from house to house, knocking on every door, holding a straw in his mouth, and says, quote, "Do you want to buy me? Chant the holy name." End quote. Having said this, he then falls on the dust, starts crying and rolling about, his hair standing on end. This is what he did. He let people see and feel a spiritual experience and gave the main method to attain that experience. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. He gave people the holy name. He did not explain what we should feel or how the holy name should work in our hearts. At a certain level, we can just chant the holy name without thinking about anything, without knowing what it stands for, without understanding all this science, without realizing who Krishna is. But sooner or later, we may get lost. Even if we start feeling something, we may not understand what it is or what the next step is. We can get lost in this spiritual experience. For our advancement, we very much depend on how clearly we understand where we are going. Sometimes, even in ISKCON, we have various points of view. One perspective is that there is no need to do much ado about to attain Vraja. Chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. There is no need to do anything else. We must just dedicate ourselves to the holy name. We must just knock on every door and shout to them, holding a straw in our mouth or a book in our hand. Quote, "You rogues, chant the holy name. Otherwise, you will go to hell." End quote. And sometimes we dance ecstatically and we get up and go on and knock on another door again. This is the method, and we should have absolute faith in it. But we also need to know the spiritual science so that eventually we come to Vraja. Lord Chaitanya infused the holy name with prema, and when we hear the holy name, we feel this love. From the very beginning, our hairs may stand on end and our tears may flow. A good example is when a new product is being released on the market. It is often given away for free. A company I once saw in Sweden had marketers handing out free samples of its new product. People were taking these, and some were repeatedly going up for more. In this way, they were given a taste of the new item. Similarly, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the Prema avatar, came and brought prema with him and began distributing it for free. Although prema is free, it is absolutely free only at the beginning. We are given this small bottle of prema, and we are told, quote, "Drink a little. You'll like it." And we do like it. But then we're told, quote, "Now, if you have to shell out and pay the price," end quote. Now we must work on our anarthas and engage in sadhana. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the most merciful. Avadanyaya. He gave prema to everyone, and each and every one of us has experienced prema. From the very beginning, our path is based not on Vaidya, but on Raga. He gave us this prema, but at the same time, he sent Rupa Gosvāmī to explain to us the obstacles that we will encounter on this path, because, like on any spiritual path, we will be besieged by a dark night. The dark night of the soul is when despair brings us down, when it gets tough, when we are unable to understand what is going on, why this taste that we felt is now gone, and where it is gone, and why. To guide us, Rupa Gosvāmī wrote an amazing guide to the spiritual emotions, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, explaining how they should evolve in our hearts. Recently, I met a bhakta, a simple-hearted man in his early 60s, who had been practicing Krishna consciousness for a couple of years. He told me, quote, "Sometimes I chant 16 rounds, and I'm very eager to quickly finish these 16 rounds so that I can chant the holy name properly. Because to chant 16 rounds is a must, and I must do it, and I'm eager to quickly finish, so then after that I can chant freely with love." End quote. He continued, quote, "I chant and chant. I chant a lot, and then it starts. I look forward to the moment when I can just chant just because the heart wants to do it. And chanting, all of a sudden, I feel tears welling in my eyes. Sometimes suddenly a sad melody comes to me that I've never heard before. When I hear it, tears begin to flow from my eyes," end quote. And then he stopped and he said, quote, "This must be abhas, right? I was told that what I feel is abhas," end quote. Clearly, he does not know what abhas, or the reflection of pure chanting, is, but he said, quote, "This abhas comes to me and makes the tears flow from my eyes, and I do not know where that melody comes from. I once sang it, and I was told that it sounds like some Muslim melody, a very poignant one. No one appreciated it, but I know it comes from there, from Krishna. When I hear it, all of a sudden it comes by itself. I have not invented it. I do not remember anything else. I just remember that Krishna is God and that I am here next to him." When I sat there with him, listening to all this, I thought, quote, "What abhas? This is not abhas. He's an uninitiated bhakta, but he has bhava in his heart. In fact, we should not think that bhava is somewhere far away. We have all felt a small sample of bhava, as I said, but Rupa Gosvāmī came to explain to us what it is, because otherwise we can get confused very easily. Tears will flow and we won't know where they're coming from, whether it is a bhas or true tears. Rupa Goswami has created an amazing book, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, which is a guide to the realm of spiritual emotion. This is why we must remember Rupa Goswami with focus. To remember him clearly means to remember what he taught us, to understand the way, so that we do not get lost again in the forest of material life. Bhakti Ratnagara is a book on the history of the Gaudiya Vaishnavism and the final years of Raghunātha Das Goswami's life. The account begins by stating that the feelings he was experiencing while living on the banks of the Radhakund defy description. He was always feeling the pain of separation from Krishna, a fire burning him from the inside. He was swimming in tears and rolling in the dust as he constantly cried, quote, "Where are you? Sri Sarup Damodar, Sri Rupa, and Sri Sanatan," end quote. He was repeating these three names because they are a treasure for all Gaudiya Vaishnavas. In Narottam Das Thakur's Bhajana Lalasa Mayi Partana from Sri Partana 4, he also sings Rupa Raghunath Pade Haibi Okute. Quote, "When will I be so eager to understand the words of Rupa and Raghunath, so that by their virtue the treasure of love for Radha and Krishna and the understanding of this love will awaken in me," end quote. In fact, even ordinary love is very difficult to understand. Pushkin, a great authority in mundane love, used to speak about it. Even with ordinary love, it is impossible to understand how it appears and disappears and what causes and destroys it. Then, what can be said of understanding the love between Radha and Krishna? But at the same time, such an understanding is our goal. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu appeared on earth and has made that love possible and achievable. Of course, sometimes the goal seems very lofty and almost unreachable. Nevertheless, it is achievable. Therefore, this third verse tells us that after we have cleared pride from our mind, we should meditate on Sri Rupa and Sri Sanatana Goswamis, because it is only through them that we can understand the pastimes of Radha and Krishna and truly understand the meaning of the holy name. In itself, the holy name contains a powerful impetus for change. We hear the holy name, and we hear that the holy name is God himself, and we realize that we can no longer live as we lived before. There are books like the Bhagavad Gita, and there are teachings and words that carry this impetus in themselves. I must not live like this anymore. I must transform my life. Sometimes people get this feeling of needing to change at the first sound of the holy name, perhaps seeing devotees on Harinam. Sometimes people underestimate the holy name as a form of spiritual practice and preaching because they do not understand what it is. I was once told a story about a Harinam in Arbat in Moscow. A girl came and stood in the crowd, suddenly then started sobbing after hearing the sound of the holy name. She began clapping her hands, tapping her foot, and singing along. When the Harinam moved on, she followed behind, and as if spellbound, sang along with the devotees, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. She walked, and when she came with them to the temple. In a couple of hours, she was dressed in sari with beads in her hand. It is Rupa Goswami, along with Sarup Damodar and Sanatana Goswami, who explained this personal spiritual experience to us and gave it a particular form. There is a story about the moment Rupa Goswami became Rupa Goswami. We chant this mantra, Sri Chaitanya Manobhistam, Stapitami Nabhutale, Swayam Rupa Kadamayam, Dadati Swapadandikam. It says that Rupa Goswami had entered the mind of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and by special mercy he could understand what was going on in Lord Chaitanya's heart. It was at a Rath Yatra, and year after year during Rath Yatra, the same thing happened over and over again that nobody could understand. When the devotees pulled the chariot of Lord Jagannath, Lord Chaitanya danced in front of that chariot, repeating strange words, Seti Parananata Painu La Yatalagi Madana Dadi Jayogenu. Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya Lila 155. Over and over again he said, quote, I have gotten the Lord of my life, for whom I was burning in the fire of lusty desires. End quote. Madana Dahane means the fire of passion. Devotees could not understand why he was saying this verse. After that, Lord Chaitanya would repeat a Sanskrit verse from the romantic collection of 100 verses by the poet Sri Amaru. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would repeat this verse over and over again. Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya Lila 158. Ya karmara hara saeva hivaras tet eva chaitra chapas ten komalita malati surabaya prado kamam bandila sa chaivasmi tatapi tatra sarata vapara lilavido reva rodasi vitasi tarutale cheta samurkantate. He was saying that the same young man who stole my heart in my youth has come back to me, and that these are the same moonlit nights of the month of Chaitra. The month of Chaitra is a very hot month, and at night when the full moon is shining and there is a cool breeze, people become peaceful. In this verse, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was saying that he can smell that same fragrance of malati flowers. He mentions fragrance here deliberately because smell has a special potency. It is able to carry us back to a situation that we have almost forgotten. Suddenly, by smelling a particular fragrance, we are transported to where we once were, even if the situation only existed in our mind. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, quote, it is the same smell that was once there in my youth, and the young man that stole my heart then is back again. The same breeze is blowing, and the same fragrance of malati flowers is wafting from the Kadamba forest, and I am the same too. Nevertheless, I'm unhappy, and I want to go back again to the place of our first meeting under the bank of the Reva, under a Vatasi tree. End quote. Everyone honored and respected Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, but no one could understand what he was saying, except for Swarup Damodar, who was admitted into the depths of his heart. He was the first to write in his memoirs who Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is. Sometime later, during Rath Yatra, Rupa Goswami was there and heard this verse. When he heard it, he returned home and wrote another verse on a palm leaf. His handwriting is even as beautiful as a string of pearls. He attached the palm leaf to the roof of his hut and then went to bathe in the ocean. Meanwhile, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came to see him, but found no one. He went to the hut and saw the verse attached to the roof. When he read it, his hair stood on end and a shiver of ecstasy ran over his skin. He wondered, quote, how does he know what is going on in my heart? Swarup Damodar knows because I've told him. He spends his sleepless nights with me. But Rupa Goswami has just come to Puri, so how does he know everything? End quote. He grabbed the leaf in ecstasy, embracing Rupa Goswami, who had returned from his bath. Then Mahaprabhu ran to Swarup Damodar, who told him about the story about this verse, and asked him, quote, Swarup, how does Rupa know what is going on in my mind? Commenting on this story, Srila Prabhupada said that once he had a similar personal story. He had written an offering to his spiritual master in the form of a poem. When Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur read it, he was so pleased that he called his closest companions and servants and had them read this offering again and again, explaining to them that his intention had been understood. Prabhupada asks, quote, I wonder how I could have understood his intention, end quote. It is the same question that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu asked Swarup Damodar, quote, I wonder how he could have understand my mind, end quote. Swarup Damodar replied, quote, he could understand only because he has received your mercy. You could not have understood it in any other way, end quote. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu confirmed this, saying, quote, I was so pleased with Rupa Goswami that when I embraced him near Siddha Bakul in Jagannath Puri after reading this verse, I invested him with all the Shakti needed for preaching bhakti and revealing the nature of bhakti to everyone else. End quote. We see that Rupa Goswami understood everything by mercy. Although certainly he already had Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mercy, the Lord further invested his spiritual Shakti, or energy, into Rupa Goswami so that he could explain it to us. After saying that Rupa Goswami understood his heart, Mahaprabhu instructed, quote, now, Sarup Damodar, go and explain everything to him, end quote. He already understood everything. He had written in that verse because Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had invested him with his Shakti. Nevertheless, even if we have understood everything and our hearts are overflowing with love of God, we should go to our spiritual master and hear him explain to us even what we have already understood. We should do this because the spiritual master will explain that we have learned what we have learned or felt in our hearts to us on the level of rational understanding. Our intuitive perception can then remain and be established in our hearts. This is a very important point that we must understand. It is the example Rupa Goswami set for all of us. This is the contribution of our sampradaya that we cannot find elsewhere. Rupa Goswami has explained bhakti as rasa. In order to understand what spiritual rasa is, let us first understand what rasa is in the worldly sense. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is repeating a verse from a mundane rasa shastra, a verse that is an example of worldly love. But Mahaprabhu has explained that bhakti in the highest sense must ultimately lead to rasa. There are two fundamental concepts, bhava and rasa. Rasa is the transformation of bhava. Bhava is an emotion. Let us first examine bhava and rasa, not in the spiritual sense, in terms of our philosophy, but in the worldly sense, so we can all relate to it. Bhava is the emotion that a person experiences, such as an actor, a poet, or a writer. The actor who is expressing an emotion on the stage, or a writer who is expressing it in the words of his poems, is expressing bhava. This bhava can be expressed even in a gesture. Worldly rasa is the result of transformation of worldly bhava. Bhava is what is expressed. A writer, a poet, or an actor reflects or represents their emotions. Someone has experienced some feeling, and I, as the reader or observer, feel the same, but as a reflection. This reflected feeling that has no relation to myself. I have not been in that situation, yet I still feel this emotion. The aesthetic sense of perception of another's emotion is called rasa. It is very important for us to understand these two terms so that we are able to comprehend in what way spiritual bhava and spiritual rasa correlate with each other. Material rasa is a product of transformation or purification of another person's bhava. Someone is experiencing some emotion or feeling, and we may have also felt them in a more coarse state. Those who listened to the Beatles were going crazy because what was going on in their hearts. The Beatles themselves were not going crazy. They just expressed some feelings in their songs. The hair of those who heard them were standing on end, tears were streaming from their eyes, and they were rolling on the ground. The fans were dying to go out and tear their idols to shreds for souvenirs because they were able to awaken in their hearts feelings that no one else could. This is how worldly rasa functions and how powerful it is. In Vedic culture, beginning with Bharat Muni, this theory of rasa was developed. Vedic philosophers possessed an amazing, unique ability to classify every possible condition. Vedic literature and culture describe how feelings arise even on the mundane level, what they consist of, what the stimulus of emotion is, and how all this takes place so that this emotion can be reproduced. This science of rasa is Rupa Goswami's contribution. He has described, demonstrated, and explained that bhakti should turn into the sublime spiritual emotion of love for Krishna. not just into service to Krishna. At the first level, we serve Krishna using our senses. We're trying to serve the Lord of the senses, using our own senses in order for them to be purified. At a higher level, we serve not with our senses, but with our emotions. In fact, what is embodied in Srimad Bhagavatam is the picture of the spiritual world, which cannot be found anywhere else. If someone tries to draw some image, it will be a picture of perception or states. Suppose we are shown an advertisement of the spiritual world. It would still be a picture of perception. Yes, it would be a beautiful sight that you can keep looking at for 40 years, but there is something lacking. It's a static image where a person is described as a kind of motionless being who is staring at that sight and enjoying it. But the inner experience is missing. Srimad Bhagavatam's descriptions of the spiritual world are unique and not found in any other scripture. Srimad Bhagavatam describes a dynamic account of a constantly expanding love experienced by the Bhakta and Bhagavan, and the reciprocation of that love. This love, swelling in the heart of the Bhakta, is reflected in the heart of God. And because of the happiness that he feels from his Bhakta's love, it starts to be reflected in the heart of the devotee and becomes even greater. It is an autocatalytic reaction that takes place between them, the reaction of love. This is the spiritual picture that Srimad Bhagavatam describes, and there is no question of time whatsoever, because when it is experienced, time is unnoticed. When someone says that he can look at the same picture for 40 years, it means that he is aware of time passing by. One thing that distinguishes rasa from worldly rasa is that there is no question of time. You can love eternally because you are never bored with love. It is ever fresh and always burning in your heart. It is always reflected in a new way and always brings new surprises. Those who enter into these pastimes of Krishna and Vrindavan and due to their sadhana gain access to these pastimes see new pastimes that no one else has described. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur describes pastimes that are not found anywhere else, neither in Srimad Bhagavatam nor in any other Purana. There have been, and there still are, those who, by entering these pastimes, can see them. Rupa Goswami and Sanatana Goswami were in these pastimes, or in this rasa. There is another aspect of rasa that we should now understand. The characteristic of worldly rasa is that rasa of the aesthetic bliss is pleasing even when the emotion someone feels is some so-called negative. It is an amazing law of rasa. In tragedies like Hamlet, for example, Western scholars tried to give some explanation to the emotions felt. They introduced the concept of catharsis. When a person is going through a tragedy, feels purification of the heart. In fact, this understanding of catharsis is the dawn of understanding of rasa, or the ascetic sense. So the characteristic of rasa is that even if the emotion is negative, it still makes us blissful. I feel grief together with the characters of the play or the singer who sings about how his girlfriend left him, but that grief makes me feel bliss. Now, the difference between that material rasa and the spiritual bhakti is as rasa. Rupa Goswami describes bhakti as rasa, taught by Sri Rupa Damodar Goswami, is that with the spiritual, we are not talking about a spectacle. We are not the spectators of the relationship between Krishna and his devotee. We enter these relationships and we feel these emotions, and the emotions are called rasa because the object of my emotions is rasa itself. Tatatriya Upanishad 271 defines God as raso savvaisa. He is rasa, or pure emotion. Krishna is rasa, and rasa is impossible to be translated in any way or by any words. It is not just a taste or emotion or anything else. Rasa is rasa. Rasa is a special state that we must clearly understand. Krishna is the fountainhead of rasa. He is Akila Rasamrita Murti. He is the infinite source of all kinds of rasa and all kinds of relationships. He's constantly inviting us to love, and Krishna becomes the object of our love. The love that we feel at some point turns into rasa. In its early stages, it is called bhava, or simply a feeling, but when the relationship becomes real, when Krishna becomes the real object of our love, it transforms into rasa. Spiritual rasa is always beautiful and always blissful for one simple reason. Even in worldly relationships, when we experience love in the material world, that love is always fraught with either fear or other negative emotions, because the object of our love is material and the relationship can hurt. In the material world, love is always defiled. Srila Prabhupada said that the purest manifestation of love in the material world is a mother's love for her child. In the material world, love is not always blissful because the child is not always blissful. When the child is suffering, the mother suffers even more than her child. Therefore, material love always contains this duality between love and suffering. But when we love Krishna, he feels happiness. When Krishna is always happy, and even when he's crying and saying, quote, "Why have you abandoned me?" end quote, he is happy all the time. Therefore, when we love him, our love is always blissful. Krishna is always rasa. Krishna himself is rasa. Just like the nature of rasa, the nature of the ascetic sense, is always bliss. Krishna is rasa vaisa. He is the pure sense of eternal bliss. And when we fall in love with him, our feeling is always blissful. Only love for Krishna can make a person truly happy, and this love is attainable thanks to Rupa Goswami. We must understand literally that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gave us prema. For example, if a piece of wood fell into the Ganges, it would end up sooner or later in the ocean, even if for some time it became stranded on the bank. Thinking, quote, "How nice it was when I was floating on the Ganges, but for the time being I will take some rest on the bank," end quote. Sometimes people think, "I have had enough of devotional service. That's it for this lifetime," end quote. But Lord Chaitanya has already given prema to us all, like it or not, and sooner or later the Ganges will again burst the banks and that piece of wood will be carried to the ocean. The piece of wood may shout again, quote, "Enough, enough. I want to go to the shore again and dry out a little bit," end quote. And the Ganga will say, quote, "If you want to lie down a bit, you can," end quote. But then it will rise again and sooner or later carry that wood to the ocean. From the very beginning, by the mercy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, we were given that prema. Sooner or later, we will get it in full if we do what Rupa Goswami has explained to us. If we follow this path, we'll eventually reach the ocean of rasa. Krishna will then appear right before us, and at that moment our emotion, our bhava, will develop into rasa and will become prema, because rasa is a synonym of prema. The combination of these rasas turns into this feeling and this emotion. It was Rupa Goswami who explained to us how to cultivate emotions. Sadhana bhakti means that we imitate those we have we imitate those who have love. They do everything that we do, and we do everything that they do. But we do everything they do in order to become like them, so ultimately love awakens in our hearts. Rupa Goswami has given us this roadmap to the realm of spiritual emotions, which will in turn into spiritual rasa, or into pure spiritual love. Rupa Goswami made use of the worldly rasa theory, the theory of ascetic bliss or ascetic pleasure that a person experiences contemplating some display of emotions. He made use of this structure to explain the mystical experience of bhakti. He did not give a new definition of bhakti. Bhakti is bhakti, and bhakti always has the nature of rasa. Krishna is Krishna, and Krishna is always rasa. The Tattva Upanishad 271 has declared, since time immemorial, Raso Vaisa, Krishna is pure rasa, pure bliss. Rupa Goswami made use of this structure to explain to us in what way we can approach the pure original rasa, the Adi rasa, that is Krishna, as quickly as possible. Rupa Goswami developed this structure so that we could attain this experience in the right way. There are people who, inspired by Lord Chaitanya's example of extraordinary ecstatic love for Krishna, try to imitate him. Of course, that is one way to try to experience it, by throwing yourself into some kind of artificial emotional state. Just go and start rolling on the ground and rub your eyes with an onion. But this would be damba, a manifestation of deception or pride, as discussed earlier in reference to the first verse of Manaḥ-śikṣā. We need a genuine experience, and Rupa Goswami has given us the structure through which we can attain true experience. Soon after Lord Chaitanya's departure, the tantrics who dressed in Vaishnava attire, the Sahajya sects, were trying to transfer their tantric experience into the sphere of love of God. We have seen how easy it is to stumble in this very delicate, subtle sphere of spiritual experience and misinterpret our emotions. An example of this is the direct associates of Lord Chaitanya. In Orissa, now Odisha, when Lord Chaitanya resided in Puri, there were several devotees who were close to him. They are still the object of worship in Odisha. The so-called Panchashakis are the 5 closest friends. If you go to Odisha, the cult of these Panchashakis is very prominent in Jagannath Puri. From our point of view, these 5 people were Sahajas of the lower sort. We do not hold them in high regard, although these people saw Lord Chaitanya and touched him. They saw the tears streaming from his eyes, but they did not understand. They deviated, and their experience turned into a cheap imitation that we, as Orthodox Vaishnavas, see as a pitiful imitation. The difference between them and us consists of one thing only, that we follow in the footsteps of Rupa Goswami. Rupa Goswami described the yoga of emotions as a science. What is very important for us to understand is that although we strive for the manifestation of absolute, spontaneous, unrestrained love, in order to attain it, we must submit to a strict discipline. We follow the path of yoga based on discipline and on a profound rational philosophy, the philosophy describing the mystic experience in categories of reason. This is the watershed that runs between the so-called mainstream of our movement of Lord Chaitanya and the various sects which are still appearing nowadays. Do not think that ISKCON will be an exception to the rule that many other religious movements have been spawning sects, but we will remain absolutely united and non-sectarian. Sects are appearing as they have always done, along with charismatic leaders, prophets, and, quote, avatars, end quote. Even in ISKCON. Rupa Goswami has come to prevent us from making this mistake, so it is imperative that we follow in his footsteps. When Raghunātha Das Goswami says, Sarupam Sri Rupam Saganam Iha Tasagarajam Api, Saganam means, quote, all associates or followers of Sri Rupa and Sri Rupa, end quote. We must remember not only Rupa Goswami, but also any follower of Lord Chaitanya who strictly follows in his footsteps. Saganan Isha Tasyagrajam Api is about all the devotees who are in one way or another connected with Lord Chaitanya, starting with Shrup Damodar, Sri Rupa Goswami, Sanatana Goswami, and their closest associates. Raghunātha Das Goswami emphasizes that remembering them is the condition for attaining love, and there is no other way to obtain love except through them and by remembering them. In the history of our Sampradaya, there was an important event held in Katuri, which was the first Gaur Purnim celebration, personally organized by Janava Mata, Lord Nityananda's wife. Narottam Das, Shyamananda Prabhu, and Srinivas Acharya, who had come from Vrindavan to Bengal with the books written by the 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan, also attended. The purpose of this festival was, above all, to establish the doctrine developed by Rupa Goswami and Sanatana Goswami in Vrindavan, and bring it to Bengal, which at that time was flooded by a huge number of Vaishnavas who followed various practices in various forms. The event took place approximately 40 or 50 years after Lord Chaitanya's departure, and by that time, those who knew him personally had started to leave this world. As it happens, those who were inspired by his personality had become confused and began to speculate. The movement, as a result, began to disintegrate into small sects because there was no single, strict doctrine. The Goswamis of Vrindavan created this doctrine, but it also had to be established. This act of establishment took place in Katuri. The exact date of the festival is unknown, but what is known without doubt is that during this festival, Lord Chaitanya personally returned and danced with Lord Nityananda. During the kirtan, the devotees suddenly saw that Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda were dancing together with them. In this way, they sanctified the festival and approved of everything that took place there. During this celebration, Narottam Das Thakur was the chief kirtanier. The wife of Lord Nityananda herself presided over it. Srinivasa Acharya, along with his disciples, helped coordinate the event. Narottam Das Thakur's stepbrother, who was the son of the king of Katuri, personally built accommodation for all the visiting Vaishnavas who came from all over Bengal, as he also assisted in the organization. Janavamata was the Acharya and is credited for the fact that she united the movement of Lord Chaitanya, which had started to fall apart, channeling it again into a single direction. She had previously gone to Vrindavan, where she studied from Jiva Goswami personally the full conclusion of Gaudiya Vaishnava doctrine. Thanks to Janavamata's extraordinary energy and influence, she had thousands and thousands of disciples. She gathered all the Vaishnavas in Katuri. Thousands of people came and danced and sang, following, quote, in the footsteps of Rupa Goswami, end quote. As a result of the Katari festival, it was recognized that the immediate associates of Lord Chaitanya directly received his mercy, which they then transmitted. In the wake of the festival at Katuri, Narottam Das Thakur wrote a famous song, Gorangera Sangi Gane Nitya Siddha Kori Mane Savarana Gori Mane Sigora Mahima. He says that one must consider all of Lord Chaitanya's associates to be Nityasiddhas, and through these Nityasiddhas we are given the opportunity to return to the spiritual world. It was then that the tradition of remembering the names of Vaishnavas originated. Another of his songs, Narottam Das Thakur, mentions several times that is the dust of the Vaishnava's feet in which he bathes. He writes, quote, chanting the names of Vaishnavas is the source of my happiness, end quote. He writes that when he hears the names of Vaishnavas, he's overwhelmed with ecstasy. The Vaishnavas' names in our tradition are called Pratat Samarniyam, which must be remembered in the morning. In other words, when we rise early in the morning, we must remember the names of the devotees of the Lord. We must remember Surupam Srirupam Sahaganam Iha Tasyagrajamapi. We must remember Raghunātha Das Goswami, Lokanath Das, Narottam, Shyamananda, and Srinivasa Acharya. We must remember them all. Imagine having woken up early in the morning and the first thing we think of is not the terrible dreams we're having, not the stomach ache, or not anything else, but Vaishnava Nam, Sarup, Shrirupa. When we wake up each morning, we can say, Sharupam, Shrirupam, Shaganam Iha Tasyagrajamapi. Raghunātha Das Goswami says here that remembering the names of Vaishnavas is the condition for attaining love of God. When we remember the devotees, attachment to Krishna appears in us by itself, because Vaishnavas are eternally linked with God. Now let us return to rasa and the theory of rasa and how the mystical experience of rasa comes. Rupa Goswami gives a definition of a sadhaka in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu 2.1.276 in terms of the elements of rasa or mystical experience. He says that there are two kinds of devotees, siddhas, devotees who have attained perfection, and sadhakas. Utpana rataya sayam naivignan anupagata Krishna sakshat kritau yogyo sadhaka pratikirtita. Sadhaka parikirtita, a person is praised as a sadhaka if utpana ratakya samyak, he has fully awakened his love for Krishna. Samyak means completely. Naivrigyanyam anupagata, but there are still some obstacles on his way. Vignyam, they are not yet fully destroyed. Śikṣāṣtaka yoga, but he is still yoga. Yoga means worthy. Śikṣāṣtaka, to directly see Krishna. Such a person is called sadhaka. In Chaitanya Charitamrita, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami says that the Sarup Lakshana, essential definition, the essence of sadhana, is Shravanam Kirtanam. Shravanadi, everything that we do is inspired by hearing, and everything that is triggered by our hearing about Krishna is sadhana. Now, he says that the Tatashta Lakshana, secondary characteristic of sadhana, is that it gives prema. Why is the main feature of sadhana Shravanam Kirtanam, and the secondary characteristic is that it gives prema? It is the main feature because the essence of sadhana is to hear and glorify Krishna. Why prema or attainment of prema is the secondary feature of sadhana is because it sometimes gives prema and sometimes it does not at that stage. Rupa Goswami explains that as we perform sadhana, as we chant the holy names, we hear and preach. When we tell others about Krishna, when we sing the holy names loudly, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, our bhava or attachment to Krishna gradually deepens. The essence of our practice is that the attachment that dawned at the very first moment of our start of devotional service in the form of Shraddha, faith, completely transformed our lives. The word Shraddha in Sanskrit comes from the word Shrad, which means truth. It is said that one of the functions of the intellect, or buddhi, is the ability to recognize truth. In the third canto of Srimad Bhagavatam 3.26.30, Kapila Dev says that intelligence has the function called nishchaya. Nishchaya means that at a certain point I recognize the truth, but not by any logical process. I understand. This is truth. Obtaining Shraddha is when suddenly the veil is removed from our eyes. We realize that there is God. We need no evidence whatsoever. We suddenly understand that He exists because it just cannot be otherwise. Faith is precisely this feeling. It is not because there is some logical chain that has led me to this understanding, or because someone told me something, or simply because it cannot be otherwise. I can recognize God. I can see this truth inside, and I fully recognize God by my intelligence or my buddhi. When we obtain Shraddha, we are overwhelmed by an extraordinary exaltation that sometimes lasts for years. Recently, someone wrote to me saying, quote, I have been chanting Hare Krishna for 2 years, and it seems like the Utsaha-mayi, the first ecstasy, is not over yet. When will it be over? End quote. If a person tries to avoid offenses and serves the Vaishnavas, this ecstasy or euphoria can last indefinitely and ultimately lead us all the way to prema. The entire path from the very beginning to the very end is infused with ecstasy, and we obtain a taste of this experience of ecstasy at the level of Shraddha. As we practice Shravanam and Kirtanam, we must deepen this ecstasy, this bhava towards Krishna. I received another letter that said, quote, when I meet the devotees, I become happy. I try to understand why I became happy, end quote. In this way, this is the way the mind works. The intellect understands something, and then the mind starts interpreting it by asking how, why, and what is happening. The letter continued, quote, and at a certain point I realized that I have suddenly found the meaning of my existence, that previously everything was pointless, end quote. This ecstasy comes because of the fact that God is in our lives, that He loves us, and that He is a personality and wants our love and nothing else. He's not some evil despot who sends everyone to hell if they do not love Him. This ecstasy can and must last and deepen in the course of our sadhana. Everything we do is only for the purpose of deepening this ecstasy. When this ecstasy reaches the stage of attachment, asakti, or the stage of bhava, it is called sthāyi bhava, and it becomes permanent. At the level of bhajana kriya, this ecstasy is sporadic. It is like a sinusoid, a curve having the form of a sine wave. It is here, and the next moment is gone. Moreover, most of this sinusoid is below zero. Sometimes the sinusoid wave elevates us somewhere, then again, bang. This is called anishta bhajana kriya, or when we have no stability. When we reach stability, our bhakti is somewhere on the zero mark in the form of a flat line. It is a smooth zero bhakti, and now and then small explosions of ecstasy overwhelm us, and again there's a flat line where we feel good, calm, and pure. But at the level of ruchi, the ecstasy gets stronger and we slightly rise above zero. But at the level of bhava, or emotion, love for Krishna, the ecstasy becomes a permanent sthāyi bhava. Rupa Goswami explains how sthāyi bhava becomes manifest externally. Sthāyi bhava means permanent bhava, or permanent love for Krishna, and is the main component of rasa. At the level of bhava, there are nevertheless things to help this ecstasy manifest itself externally. One of the elements of rasa, when sthāyi bhava turns into rasa, is vibhava. Rupa Goswami explains that vibhava consists of three things: vishaya alambana, ashraya alambana, and udipana. Sometimes it is said that Krishna is udipana. Sometimes it is said that Krishna is vishaya alambana. Sometimes that Krishna is ashraya alambana. It is also sometimes said that the devotees are udipana. Sometimes ashraya alambana, and sometimes that the devotees are vishaya alambana. However, Rupa Goswami means a very simple thing. Ashraya means one with whom love rests. Vishaya means object of love. Udipana means stimulus of love, something that reminds us of Krishna. When we hear about Krishna or see a picture of him as the object of love, or we hear a description of Krishna as the object of love, as the Vishaya, the one who is loved, then love, or rasa, can awaken in us. When we hear how a devotee loves, ashraya alambana, the one who carries love within, then rasa can be awakened in us too. When we hear some things associated with Krishna, they are incentives or udipanas that awaken love or the experience of rasa. When Rupa Goswami says that there are two kinds of love carriers who are capable of generating the experience of rasa in our hearts, he means that a love carrier can either be a siddha or a sadhaka. We can either hear about how Lalita and Vishaka and Rupa Manjari associate with Krishna, or we can listen about how a sadhaka associates with Krishna. By listening about the sadhaka, we begin to experience rasa. When we hear how the sadhaka loves Krishna, rasa is awakened in our hearts. Therefore, Rupa Goswami says that a sadhaka has already reached a level where his love for Krishna has become fully manifest, and he is eligible to directly associate with Krishna. However, at the same time, there is some obstacle in his way. And when we hear how he overcomes those obstacles on his way to Krishna, rasa appears in us. Our love for Krishna, our sthāyi bhava, the dormant love for Krishna, starts manifesting itself. When we see what a devotee does out of love for Krishna, a devotee who has reached the highest level of attachment and who is ready to see Krishna, how he or she is overcoming the obstacles standing in his way, ready to sacrifice everything, when we remember this, attachment to Krishna or the experience of rasa comes to us. We thus understand another meaning of this verse when Raghunātha Das Goswami says, quote, "Remember clearly Rupa Goswami," end quote. Because who is Rupa Goswami? Is he a siddha or a sadhaka? He is a siddha playing the role of a sadhaka. He is a sadhaka avesha, in the body of a sadhaka. He runs around Vrindavan and cries, "Hey Radhe, Brajadevike, Chaliditesh, Hey Nandasuna Kata." Śikṣāṣtaka, verse 8. Where are you? I cannot see you. We think of Sanatana Goswami and we think of the obstacles he had to overcome in order to come to Lord Chaitanya. Of Lord Chaitanya seeing him in his expensive chadar and Lord telling him, quote, "Give away this expensive blanket," end quote. Of how he nearly got killed in an inn by the owner and how Hussain Shah sent him to prison. We read about this and see how love manifests itself in the pure devotees. When Rupa Goswami explains Ashraya Alambane, he explains how a pure devotee loves Krishna and how he responds to him. Srila Prabhupada's love for Krishna manifested in his renunciation of everything, including his wife, and going out to preach, in the fact that he carried the order of his spiritual master in his heart throughout his life, and that the order of his spiritual master was the thread upon which Srila Prabhupada's entire life was strung. That was the manifestation of his love for Krishna. What should happen in our hearts when this inspires us? Love for Krishna should come. An experience of rasa should appear. Raghunātha Das Goswami says, quote, "O mind, if you want to attain attachment to Krishna, then constantly remember," end quote. He says to remember the sadhaka devotees who have spent all their lives in Vrindavan and who are willing to go through anything for the quest of God. Remember Sri Rupa, Sarup, and Sanatana Goswamis, who have given up everything in order to come to God, and all the other devotees who can generate in our hearts that same attachment and cause tears to come to our eyes.